This show brings together two heroes who come from different generations and different sports. Our guest interviewer is from Leicester, where he idolised his sporting hero from the stands. Mark Selby was born in Leicester in 1983. After being spotted at an early age, he joined the main professional snooker tour aged just 16. Mark won his first major tournament in 2008, and his career has gone on from strength to strength. His ultimate glory was his victory in the World Championship in 2014. He beat Ronnie O'Sullivan 18-14 in the final, and so became the 9th player to win the triple crown of World, UK and Masters titles. His sporting hero is Martin O'Neill. He spent most of his career playing for Nottingham Forest, where he won many honours, including the European Cup twice. After retiring from playing, O'Neill moved into management with several clubs. At Leicester City, he won the League Cup twice before moving on to manage Celtic. Here, in his first season, he won a domestic Scottish treble, the first time Celtic had achieved this since 1968. In his 5 years as Celtic manager, O'Neill won the league on 3 separate occasions. His next stops were Aston Villa, Sunderland and the Republic of Ireland.
Well, firstly, Martin, can I just say it's an absolute honour for me to be sitting here today interviewing yourself, being a huge Leicester City supporter as a young boy. You've done wonders, and I've had some great memories over the years watching Leicester come through, and not only just me, but as a city as well. But we'll get to that a bit later on. Martin, you was one of 9 children, having 4 brothers and 4 sisters. What was it like being raised in such a big family?
A big Irish Catholic family, yeah, 4 brothers, 4 sisters. Actually pretty good. I was in roughly about the middle, and brothers were very sport orientated. We were in a Gaelic background, you know, where my 2 older brothers played Gaelic for county and at provincial level as well. 2 younger brothers, all 4 were brilliant footballers, I must admit. And but it was the 2 older players, 2 older brothers that I was aspiring to, really, because their prowess at both Gaelic football and in athletics was really terrific. So I had a lot to live up to.
Who would you say been your biggest influence to get you into sport? I know you just touched on the Gaelic side of stuff. Did you play that yourself, or was it just your brothers who was involved?
Yeah, I did play. I played Gaelic, and I played Gaelic to what we call minor level, really under-18 football for the county of Derry. And I enjoyed it immensely. I also played for my college team as well too. Professional football really was something that I wanted to do, even from an early age. I just assumed that you probably felt the same about snooker, you know, turning professional at 16 years of age. So that's probably something that you wanted to do. Nothing was going to stop you. Well, I was growing up with the likes of George Best a few years in front, trying to get to that sort of standard to play in the English League was a big ambition of mine. And might have been a wee bit difficult because I went to a boarding school from 11 until 16, but moved family from the country up to Belfast in 1968. Then I started playing with youth teams. Then got picked up by Distillery, and life was pretty rosy at that time.
Yeah, I mean, just touching on Distillery, you scored in the cup final in 1971, which led you to play in the European Cup final, where you scored against Barcelona as well. How much of that do you still remember?
Well, quite a lot, really. Yes, because I was still doing A levels at St Malachy's College in Belfast. I was playing for Distillery on a part-time basis, and we reached the cup final. We beat Derry City in April of 1971, which, as you say, allowed us to go into the European Cup Winners' Cup in those days. And we were drawn against Barcelona, and I mean, there was absolute delight amongst the players because. One, we're going to go to Barcelona. First of all, we have a game to play at home. We got beaten 3-1, but I scored the goal and I felt terrific, absolutely terrific. We were well and truly hammered in the second leg, but I think because of that and because of the goal, it drew a little bit of attention to me by some of the teams over the water, as they would say in those days. back over in England, and one of those being Nottingham Forest. And a couple of weeks later, I was actually chosen to play as a replacement in the international setup. Northern Ireland, were going to be playing Russia. This was October of 1971. And a couple of the players didn't turn up, George Best being one of them. Hardly surprising, I think. But instead of sending for replacements, English replacements or English base replacements, the manager at the time, Terry Neal, decided to bring me into the squad just to give me a little bit of, I suppose, a bit of experience. And from there, within a week, not only had he made a bid for me of £10,000, he was actually player manager of Hull City, but Nottingham Forest topped that for 15,000. So 10 days later, after that game, I was becoming a professional footballer in England.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next question. I mean, you got spotted by a scout at Nottingham Forest, which not long after that, they ended up signing you. Was that a great feeling, knowing that you was playing under the manager of Brian Clough a little while later?
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was going to come in January of 1975 and change our lives completely, and naturally for the better. But this was the moment. I was a student at Queen's University. I was studying law, and I had a choice to make, and the choice was to become a professional player. My mother, I think, at that stage was certainly really focused on education, was concerned about going over to play in England and maybe not making the grade. Of course, not making the grade never entered my head. I thought, well, of course I'm going to make the grade. So I gave up law studies, became the professional player in about October of 1971, and started off really well, Mark, really well. Scored a goal in my debut within a month, scored a goal at Old Trafford, and in December against George Best, and then hit a bad spell. I think it only lasted about 5.5 years, I think, you know. But you're supposed to laugh at that. But
I can't imagine you having a bad spell. You're my sporting hero, remember?
So the club itself was in real decline. Their best players were leaving. Ian Story-Moore left to go to Manchester United that year of 71-72. The team got relegated. But because it was all new to me, I was a professional player. I was living the dream, and therefore I felt that it was only a matter of time before I really exploded onto the scene. It did take a little time. We were dawdling around in the what would be known today as the Championship, but it was in the second division in those days. We had a number of managers. One brilliant one, the late Dave Mackay, who was excellent for myself and John Robertson. He didn't hang around for that long, became manager of Derby. But Brian Clough, who was out of work, having been sacked by Leeds in 1974, became our manager in 75, and it changed our lives completely. We went in 5 years from being an average second division side to getting promotion, to winning the Championship, to winning 2 European Cups and playing in the World Club Championship. And those were heady days indeed.
Can you remember the first time you met him and the impact he had on you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. He walked into our dressing room in a very cold, damp January morning, and John Robertson tells me, I don't remember this part, but John Robertson says that he just took his coat off and flung it on a peg and said, and it was really cold, and said, "Right, lads, let's start to work." We were in the second division at the time, but we were going to be playing a replay of an FA Cup match against Tottenham Hotspur, and a couple of days later at White Hart Lane, because we had drawn against them in the third round. So he had taken over in between matches. So he said, "Right, okay." Team talk did not last long, but he said, "Okay, I'll meet you on Wednesday. We're going to travel down to Bisham Abbey. We're going to stay there for 4 days. We're going to play the game on Wednesday night against Tottenham. We had a league fixture against Fulham on the Saturday, so we were going to get 4 days to get to know him." And I'd been out of favour with the previous manager, a man called Alan Brown, But I was in the dressing room at the time, and he said, "Okay, see you all Wednesday. Oh, by the way, is young O'Neill here?" And I pointed out, "Yes, I'm here." He said, "You're coming with us." And I actually played the game against Tottenham Hotspur. Did all right. We knocked Tottenham out of the cup. And I played the following week against Fulham. Did okay. It was, but you had to earn your place in that team, I must admit. And when his sidekick, for want of a better word, Peter Taylor, arrived about 14, 15, 16 months later, the two of them gelled like they had done at Derby County, and they just took us to places that we would never dream of going to.
What would you say your relationship with Brian Clough was like?
I think it would be, I think looking back, I would probably say it was tetchy. I think that I have had this joke since that I've said that we had a difference of opinion on my ability. I thought I was really brilliant, and he wasn't so sure. But in reality, I did play the big games. I played a lot of matches for him, scored a few goals from midfield as well too, about 60 odd. Try and get that in. And yeah, I was. I think he once said about me that I was kind of overbearing. That I spoke back to him. I shouldn't really have done so. You know, when I've been managing since, and some people.
You're probably one of the few people that did.
Well, I did not. It wasn't always to my credit, I must admit. But I always had to have a say in matters. I was nearly going to say the final say, but there was no such thing as a final say with Brian Clough. He had it. He had it all the time, and he was invariably right. That's why he was such a brilliant manager. But no, as time went on, I think I think there was an appreciation there, and I did play the games. I was there at the beginning alongside John Robertson, Viv Anderson, and Tony Woodcock and Ian Boyer. We were there from the day one, and we were there when we also won the second European Cup. Tony Woodcock had gone to Cologne at that time, and there were a number of changes made in the side during the course of those years. I think he tried to always try and replace me, but he always found me popping up somewhere, you know, saying, "I'm still here, I'm still scoring those goals. You can't get anybody from wide midfield to score the number of goals that I do, and I still do the job." So, and I suppose then, they were great years. I look back at them with great fondness, and why wouldn't you? You thought you were going to stay 26 for the rest of your life.
Fantastic. So on reflection, have you learnt much from him for your managerial career?
I think really, Mark, that you would have to be unbelievably stupid not to have spent 5 years with him and picked things up. That said, when he arrived at the football club as a young manager with a point to prove, because he'd been sacked at Leeds United, and he desperately wanted to prove himself again as to be the outstanding manager that he knew he was. But I had there was no thoughts of management. Playing was what it was all about. And you wanted to see your name in that team sheet every single Saturday, and you wanted to go out and play the game. So as we went from promotion from the second division to really being absolutely brilliant as a side in the year that we won the championship, went straight up from promotion. Last team to do it was Ipswich, I think, in 1961-62. So we won the championship, beating the likes of Liverpool and Everton and Tottenham and all those sides then. So there were great days. If you're asking me about management then, it never have entered my head. But as years rolled on, of course, and then as you get a bit older and your footballing career finishes and you think about management, it'd be difficult not to think about how Clough might have solved a few problems. And then we go to Wembley, where we beat Crystal Palace. And I think winning that day at Wembley was just a sensational moment.
Your first big club was Norwich City in 1995. Only lasted 6 months. Mm-hmm. From then on, you went to Leicester City, my beloved club. How did that come about?
Well, I had, Yeah, I left Wickham after 5 years. I think it was time to go at that particular that stage. This was about the summer of 1995. I went down to Norwich, where I'd been a player for 2 short spells and had done very well. I loved the area, loved the club. But of course, since I'd been a player, there'd been a lot of changes that naturally changes in the player element, but changes at board level as well too. So there was a man in charge called Mr. Chase, Robert Chase, who was the chairman of the football club. And in fairness, although he picked me, I think he chose me because the crowd probably wanted me to become the manager. Not so sure that he was all that keen on me. And the feeling after a few months became mutual. And so I left after 6 months. Chance to join Leicester City at the same time. Mark McGee, who was the manager, had gone to manage Wolves. And and Mr. George, who was the chairman of Leicester at the time, who had interviewed me once before when Brian Little had left. But I'm not so sure that I think it was one of those interviews where, you just, you sit around, you hear what somebody has to say, and then you dismiss it. And I think that was what he did. He just dismissed me. But this time around, he wanted me to become the manager, and I took it, not realising, of course, that at board level, there was massive upheaval at that time. Mr. George, you won't mind me saying, wasn't all that popular with the rest of the board members. And because he was my choice, I became unpopular with the board members as well too. That didn't help. And of course, when you get off to a pretty wretched start at Leicester at the time as well too, didn't win a game in 10 matches. I think some of those were FA Cup games against Manchester City, and a couple were draws as well too. So the natives started to get restless very, very early on, and culminating, I think, in March of 1996, when we got beaten 2-0 by Sheffield United, where there was absolute uproar. The crowd showed their anger in many ways, swearing at me probably didn't help, and it looked pretty ominous at that stage.
So what would you say changed? How did your fortunes change at Leicester from being in such what you're classing as probably a bad position to being a huge success?
Right. Okay. Well, it was a bad position. I clung on to the fact that, one, I hadn't been there that long, and I hadn't been given a proper chance to turn things around. I started signing a couple of players. Stevie Claridge had arrived at the football club, and Neil Lennon as well too. Both of them are very, very good signings. Lennon went on to prove himself as a brilliant Leicester City player, and Claridge probably didn't hang around long enough to do so. But he was splendid while he was there. But at that stage there were there were just rumblings. There was a bit of, I'm nearly going to say player unrest, but there was a number of players who felt that Mark was going to come in for him at Wolverhampton Wanderers, and that they wanted to leave. One or two of the players, in fairness, I wanted to get out the door anyway, to be perfectly honest with you, because I didn't think they were good enough. And so you had to sort of quell that. And of course, with the crowd then being restless, it gives players a bit of an excuse, to turn in or blame a poor performance on the manager. That said, there were some very, very good characters at the football club as well too, I think. And that Muzzy Izzet signing on loan turned their fortunes as well. Some really good players you started to believe, but we started to win a few matches, Mark, which is the most important thing. And suddenly we turned it round, got into the playoffs, made it, possibly by the skin of our teeth, and there we were in the playoffs, two-legged match against Stoke City, and then we knocked out, and then we go to Wembley where we beat Crystal Palace. And I think winning that day at Wembley was just a sensational moment. We've won it. The last kick of the game, Claridge scores the goal, and we win. And so there's a vindication there, that very moment, of the players that you've signed and the methods that you're using. And I think that was the start of it.
Yeah, I still remember that moment. My very first game, what I vaguely remember, was Swindon, when we played in the playoffs, when it was under Brian Little.
Yeah.
But I don't really remember that too much. My biggest memory, which I remember, is, as you was touching on, the Crystal Palace playoff game where Steve Claridge scored. He says it was a volley, but it probably rolled down his leg and flicked him from 25 yards. But, I mean, that was a fantastic feeling. I still remember being there with my father. The place just absolutely erupted. You was running up and down the touchline, which was fantastic, which we'll touch on in a while. But, I mean, for me, just as a fan, obviously it was a great feeling being in the crowd, feeling that emotion. But you as a manager, that must have just been a fantastic feeling.
Well, it was. It genuinely was, because if we'd got to the final and got beaten, let's say by Crystal Palace, who incidentally the following year actually went up through the playoffs. I think they beat Sheffield United. But that particular day was a big moment, because had we have lost the final, and we were brilliant that day, we should have won quite easily in them, and it took a long time for us to turn it around. We were a goal behind and eventually won 2-1. But let's say we'd been beaten in the final. It meant that you were going back into the second division again, or the championship as it's called now, the next year, and you feel you had to start all over again. And perhaps, you know, any sort of lull in proceedings, then that crowd that might have been showing that angst, anxiety, anger, that might have surfaced again. Whereas here, you know, we had a chance now because we got promotion. I know it was quite late, and in terms of preparation for the following season, it didn't matter, but it was still great feeling. And I felt then, if you were going to ask me, would it be easier? I thought this at the time. Could we stay in the division? I thought that would be easier than trying to get promotion again. And I felt that we could do it. Now, after 4 or 5 matches, yeah, I might have thought differently of the next season, that said. But it worked out terrifically, because we made a couple of decent signings as well too. And we got a run going in the League Cup. I think it was the Worthington Cup at that time. We get to the final. We beat Middlesbrough after a replay, and suddenly, as I mentioned earlier, you've got the trophy, and you've got that belief, and you've got players believing in themselves, which is most important, believing in you, and your confidence is absolutely at its top.
Yeah, that was my next question. I was going to say, what was the reason for you leaving Leicester?
I think we'd won the League Cup. We were in Europe, and we'd finished in the top 10 again in the Premier League. So it was fine. If Celtic had not come in for me, I would have been very, very content to stay on at
Looking
Leicester.
back, I wish they hadn't.
Well, but I'd done my 5 years at the time at Leicester. No, and I felt, you know, that the money that we were going to get, if I was going to get some of that money to use, that we had received for Emile Heskey from Liverpool, yeah, there was that chance again to rebuild the side. And we needed obviously a couple of extra players. I didn't have any real problem about that. It was just the pull of Celtic at that particular time. And I suppose maybe growing up as being my Scottish side, I also supported Sunderland, of course, as my English team growing up. But I felt maybe that was the time to go. It wasn't the case of not being able to take Leicester any further. I always had great ambition for Leicester. In fact, you know, we finished 4 times in the top 10. But I wanted to qualify for Europe with Leicester through the league. And we went very close one particular year, went the last couple of games before it was taken away from us. But even so, we qualified for Europe through the winning of the League Cup twice. And it wasn't a case of having done enough at Leicester at all. It was a case of this pull for Celtic at that time. If you ask me, winning the treble, of course it exceeded expectation. Of course it exceeded anything that I felt that was capable in the first year. But you'll take it.
Celtic being such a big club with the rivalry, Rangers and Celtic, we have Manchester United, we have Manchester City rivalries, but it's so much different. Talk us through the rivalry of Celtic and Rangers.
That was big, yeah. You just touched on leaving. I must admit, leaving Leicester in the year in June of 2000 was difficult. We had won the League Cup again. We'd beaten Tranmere Rovers in the final. We were going into Europe once again. It was great. Emil Heskey had left, had gone to Liverpool. We got £11 million for him. I was promised a substantial amount of that money, I think, to try and improve the team. I felt I'd earned the right anyway to try and improve the side as well too. Emil was going to be a big loss to us, but you always felt, well, okay, he's gone, we've got some money. £11 million in those days was an awful lot of money. I felt that maybe we could use it wisely. My record in the transfer market at that particular time was really good, and I felt I could spot players as well too, the likes of Izzet and Lennon, people like that there were coming through, had been very, very successful. So it was a wrench leaving it. But going to Celtic, who'd been boyhood team in Scotland, my father had been a big supporter of them. He always said, if you get a chance to play for Celtic, you should go. But this was going to manage them. They were on the doldrums at that stage. Rangers were very, very dominant. They'd won the league so many times. But I felt this was a challenge that I wanted to do, wanted to make, and I wanted to experience that match, or those matches against Rangers. But more importantly than that, I just wanted to try and wrest the championship away from Rangers to see if we could do it as quickly as possible. You mentioned the games themselves. They were incredible occasions, the Celtic Rangers matches, full of everything, full of bile, full of hatred, full of vitriol, yet something absolutely intangibly brilliant about them. And sometimes it was a relief to have the game over. Other times you look forward to it like you wouldn't believe. My first game in charge, we won 6-2, and I think that was just I couldn't have dreamed to have that sort of start. It was about 5 or 6 matches into my Celtic career, and to beat Rangers that day, Henrik Larsson scored a wonder goal. Young Stilian Petrov was magnificent as well too, and it was great. So from then on in, even though we had been some good days and some dark days as well too, the experience of managing the football club was fantastic.
Your first season as manager, you won the treble. The first time it's been achieved since 1968. Did this exceed your expectations going there? I mean, watching the Scottish Football League, everyone knows you have Celtic, Rangers rivalry. Hearts was probably the third best team.
Yeah.
And all the others just seem to mix between themselves. So in theory, you probably got 3 big teams which you're competing against. So going there, did you think you was always going to exceed what you exceeded?
Well, it's a good point. I suppose I had an inner belief rather than this sort of pretentious self-confidence. I think it was an inner belief that I could change things around. We had lost the league the previous year. Celtic had lost the league the previous year by about 21 points. So it was going to be very difficult to overturn that type of deficit to a very dominant Rangers side who were performing very well in the Champions League as well too. So, and I really wasn't sure. I think if I'm being totally honest here, I think the first year that I would been hoping to have closed the gap for a start, got to know what our players were like, what they were like under that sort of pressure, whether they wilted in big games or not, or whatever we had. And but I think the match that I'm referring to, that 6-2 victory in our 5th or 6th match of the season against our big rivals, gave us that confidence. Now, I know some months later we travelled over to Ibrox and were well beaten 5-1, but there was a good mindset about that by then. And we had a good mentality. We felt we could win the league then at that stage, and that this was, although a beating by Rangers, it wasn't going to be the end of the world. And we didn't lose another league game then until the league had been won. So if you ask me, winning the treble, of course it exceeded expectation. Of course it exceeded anything that I felt that was capable in the first year. But you'll take it. And we got on such a run, and the players were playing magnificently at the time, that we felt as if, nothing was impossible at that stage.
Would you say your biggest achievement at Celtic was getting them back into Europe, getting them back on the big stage, being a creditable team?
I think looking back, I must admit that in the year 2000, when I arrived in June, we had to play a pre-qualifying game against Luxembourg in our European venture for the UEFA Cup at that time. We had to play a pre-qualifying game against Luxembourg. That's how far that perhaps Celtic status had fallen at that stage. So for us, the next year, to play in the Champions League, we had to play a qualifying game to get through. We had beaten Ajax, who had a lot of good players at that time, including an up-and-coming Ibrahimovic. But we beat Ajax. We got 9 points in the group and didn't go through to the second stages or the last 16 or whatever it was at that stage. And but we still beat big sides, including Juventus, and a great night at Celtic Park. So I think then we reached the UEFA Cup final in 2003, where we were beaten by Porto, which was Mourinho's first trophy at that stage, and we should have won that game. Lost 3-2 in extra time. So I think that days were great. It's for other people to make some sort of judgments in that, but I think that we could contest pretty strongly in European football, and I think that Gordon Strachan, who came after me, carried that on, and so I think that us competing in Europe was obviously important for the football club, but being able to compete properly in Europe was, and being able to win some big matches as well too, was a credit to the team.
What would you recall in that night in Seville about the atmosphere and the support that the Celtic fans obviously gave to you?
Well, 70,000 Celtic fans descended in Seville for that match. They knew that they couldn't get tickets for the game. The stadium only held 50,000, and I think eventually it was like 35,000 to us, 15,000 to Porto, and a lot of Porto fans sold their tickets to Celtic fans. Would they tell me that the scenes in the city itself were amazing? I think there might only have been one arrest at that time for 70,000 fans. It was unbelievably hot, and any fan who was at the game says that the scenes were just amazing. Of course, as you travel to the game, you see the fans waving, and that last mile of the trip, although we were starting to get a bit late, the bus was getting a bit late and we were starting to panic a little bit, but just to see the sight of green and white was extraordinary. Then we go into the stadium, and just to see that sea of green and white was phenomenal. Not to win the game was disappointing. Henrik Larsson, who was a great player for us, possibly had his finest game ever, scored 2 great goals. Game going to extra time. We had a man sent off, second bookable offence, and Porto score a goal to win it in extra time. They go on to win the Champions League the next year with virtually the same side. So we had a really good team. It was a disappointment not to win and yet it still remains outside Lisbon in 1967 when the Lisbon Lions, the great Celtic side, won the European Cup against Inter Milan. It remains a big memory to fans of, I would say, between the ages of you and me.
So you had 5 years at Celtic, you took a break for a little while,
yeah.
You came back, you went to Aston Villa. Was you always going to come back into management, or was you always going to go to any club, or did it have to be a Premier League club?
Well, I felt I'd earned the right to manage in the Premier League, and unless you actually own a club yourself, I think that the Premier League is where you want to be. Yes, I had a break. My wife was ill at the time, and she was recovering, and the opportunity to go and manage Aston Villa came around in 2006. There was a change of ownership. Mr. Lerner, American owner, was coming in. He bought the club off Doug Ellis, and I was, although Doug Ellis was the one that had made me the manager, but I knew that there was going to be a change at that time. Doug had informed me so, and I'd spoken to Mr. Lerner beforehand. So when he came in, kept me on as the manager at the time, and first year was pretty difficult, hard year, real hard struggle. I think we finished 11th or something, I guess, there, and then we had 3 top 6 finishes after that. I must admit, signed some really good players, Milner, Young, and they were excellent. Stuart Downing as well too, and those players went on obviously to do brilliantly for Aston Villa, and do equally as well for other clubs, and sold for fairly decent money. Seems as if I'm trying to vindicate it all, but Aston Villa were, we had a decent side, more than a decent team. We had a very good side. Outside Manchester United, I felt we were probably the best counter-attacking team in the league. We had a lot of pace, like Bonlaher up front as well too. Signed big John Carew and as well, and John, when he decided he wanted to really play, which wasn't always the case. He was formidable. He was very, very strong, and we had a good team. But in answer to your question about coming back in, yes, I felt I had earned the right to manage in the Premier League.
Yeah, I remember you went to Aston Villa, you took them to the first League Cup final in 10 years. What is it with you in management? Every team you go to, you just seem to be able to, it's like a light switch, you seem to flick on and off. Wherever you go, you always seem to have huge success.
Well, again, it's very nice of you to say so. I went to Sunderland, which was my last club management, or my last club in management in club level. So, and I didn't stay a full season there. The owner decided he wanted to make a change at the time, and I felt then that well, that's his prerogative to do so. Felt as if we could, first year is always going to be difficult. Your first full season in charge is going to be difficult. If you start getting it right, I thought that again might have earned the time, or might have earned the right to have stayed on a little bit longer. But that's entirely the owner's prerogative. There's no such thing. This game doesn't give you time anymore, and I was disappointed at the outcome of that. But you get on with it if that's the case. The team did not get relegated. They weren't actually going to get relegated even with me in charge, because I think my record would have suggested so. But even so, outside that disappointment of my time at Sunderland, considering as well that was my boyhood team as well too, that was galling.
As a Leicester manager, what would be your most memorable memory?
Well, oh gosh, I don't know in terms of order. Maybe take them chronologically. I think we touched on the fact that day at Wembley in 1996, where everything that happened after that was made possible by us winning against Crystal Palace in the playoff final. The fact that we took over 40,000 people to the game to show what Leicester City really was all about as a football club. And the night at Hillsborough, where we won our first trophy, we beat Middlesbrough in the replay. That was pretty special. Really was special to win something. Again, getting back, touching the point that give you something tangible, that you felt that this was every bit of tearful enjoyment of such a thing was worthwhile. And I think going back to Wembley as well a couple of times. Going back, we didn't perform too well against Tottenham Hotspur in 1999, and therefore to go back the following year and win it against Tranmere Rovers, to go and qualify for Europe again, and another trophy for us was particularly special. Interspersed with, obviously, with the moment you mentioned, the 3-3 draw against Arsenal, some great days at Filbert Street where we'd come from behind. I remember us, actually, it might have been the last game Emile Heskey played for us, where just a week after the League Cup final, we played Sunderland at Filbert Street, We were unbelievably strong and powerful and good, and we beat Sunderland 5. I think Emile left the week after that there to go to Liverpool. So a lot of memories, Mark, I must admit, a lot of memories. And of course, I think in hindsight, and maybe as I look back, maybe it wasn't a bad thing to start off so poorly. Maybe it made me realize how close you could be not to experiencing any of those good days there at all, and maybe another couple of poor results, and who knows, you might have found yourself signing up and watching you play snooker. But no, great memories, great football club, genuinely great football club. And my days at Filbert Street were really special, and because I had a group of special players as well too. Thankfully, they didn't realise that, and the supporters were terrific.
Well, thank you, Martin. Once again, as I said at the start of the show, it's been an absolute honour for me to interview you today as my sporting hero.
Well, Mark, I have to say, just on final notes, I'm delighted to be here, absolutely delighted to be here. You yourself have been fantastic. To be the world champion, before you reach the age of 32 years of age is just magnificent, really. And again, watching the programme on television, about what the players, both past and present, have said about you. You've got that inner determination. Somewhere along the way, you've found that. It'd be nice to know where you found it from. Maybe you could pass it on to me. And but it was just interesting to listen to Willie Thorne speaking about you, where he thought, yeah, got dedication, but didn't think that you would ever be a professional snooker player, never mind being a world champion.
Yeah.
And that's refreshing, and I think actually that's great. So it's really him saying, hey, I'm totally wrong, that you are the world champion. So you've spent the hours doing it. You know what it's like. And I think as a professional footballer, I think that what we did, because we weren't in an individual sport. Of course, the great individuals playing it, but you were there on your own. That's what I like about you and about tennis players and about golfers. You're there essentially on your own. So you can't turn around. There was games I've played in for Nottingham Forest, even under Brian Clough, where things weren't going so well. And I thought, do I really want that ball today? I'll just not disappear in behind two players so that John Robertson can't find me. You can't do that at all. You have to go and battle it. So I've got the utmost regard, and you've gone and proved yourself at such a young age. I'm still trying to prove myself at twice your age.
No, thank you very much. And just finally, as I said, you being my sporting hero, who would be your sporting hero and why?
Well, okay, I always wanted to be a professional footballer, so football was ingrained with me. Television, although it wasn't in my household at that time, but I remember the great Real Madrid team winning European Cups, being in all white, and Puskas being a sensational left-footed player, absolutely fantastic. Then the days of George Best coming through from Northern Ireland, well, it would be hard not to have been. And I actually played with him once or twice. Jimmy Johnson at Celtic was another extraordinary little winger who was just a fantastic player. And I've met all of those people, including Puskas. So perhaps maybe, and as I think about it, maybe Charlie O'Hurley, who was a great centre-half at Sunderland, and he was voted just recently as the player of the century for Sunderland, and I've not met him. So maybe that's the news. Never meet your heroes.
Well, thank you, and once again, I wish you huge success in the future.
Thank you, and you as well too.
Thank you.
Good luck, Mark.